Rumiko Takahashi. If there's one woman I love in this world as much as Princess Leia, it's probably her. Want to talk about the whole package? You got clever, funny, original, arguably one of the most impactful mangaka of all time. You don't get the nickname Princess of Manga by writing a one-hit wonder. This lady's been going on this for, something up to almost 50 years. In case the name doesn't ring a bell for you, her works include Yurusei Yatsura, My Son Ikoku, Ranma Half, Inuyasha, and of course her most current project, Mao, which you should definitely check out if you haven't yet, and of course, many, many more. And she's not just a talented artist and writer, she almost single-handedly popularized the romantic comedy genre within manga, while also maintaining an intense level of character and theming in her works, which resonate deeper than a lot of other creators could possibly hope for. There's even some serious violence and gore thrown in there. You know how I like that stuff. If you watched our Ranma Half video that we did last September, you know what I'm talking about, but we've also done a video covering Inuyasha, which is one of my all-time favorite series, as well as a major comfort anime for me. Of course, Takahashi's work is generally quirky and fun. There's definitely some reaction images that are attributed specifically to her, but her works also have underlying lessons that stem from exceptionally well-written characters. Characters built to be inherently flawed and generally need to bash their head against a wall of morality, until they learn something about themselves. She's very good at writing teenage boys. And a lot of people think, oh, well, here's a prodigy then. And the truth is, she's not. Takahashi-san has not been making manga since she was 3 years old. She was simply obsessed with the medium since she was able to read, a fan herself. And her love of manga eventually led to her going to school for it, making friends that also enjoy manga as well. And all of this despite her parents telling her that there is no way a future in this career would ever work out. Of course, in time that would prove to not be true, as she has obviously become one of the most successful manga creators of all time. Let's not forget about that. But putting that aside, she is a living example of somebody who went through difficulty and hardship to follow their passion and their dream. And not only that, she came out of the other side with a win. And honestly, I can't understand why her story would resonate with a YouTube channel run by a couple of guys who worked in the background for years and years. But speaking of us, thanks to Viz, Tyler and I were able to make this very special episode of Bonsai Pop on a creator who we are both inspired by and care about, and in return support her in a way that we have never been able to before. So this is the story of Rumiko Takahashi, how she embodies a turning point in manga history, how she changed the scene as we know it, and why you should care. So let's get into it. So earlier this year in our Punk Rock Cartoons Volume 2 video, I said that we were going to be cutting way back on sponsorships for 2022. We like and want Bonsai Pop to be community driven and community supported, and frankly, there are very few companies that we would be willing to work for anyway. Then of course, Viz got in contact with us. They wanted to know if we would be willing to promote a new release of a collection of Rumiko Takahashi's short stories. And of course, yeah, we're there, we want to do that. I don't think there's ever been a sponsorship that was more geared to our channel and my personal tastes. Being able to support somebody who has both inspired us and allowed us to make a living on YouTube is it's an honor and a privilege. So I would like to introduce you to Came the Mirror and Other Tales, a collection of short stories written by Rumiko Takahashi and published by Viz. These short stories date anywhere from 1999 to 2013, and you can absolutely see the influence of Ranma and Inuyasha in these works, but the works themselves range from some weird romantic comedies that definitely harken back to Ranma Half, to some strange spooky tales, to even some funny one-offs about stalkers. It is prime Rumiko Takahashi, and it's one of those works that you pick up and before you know it, you're done with it. The whole entire thing was just a blast to read. Not to mention, it's also fun and funny. It's got that Rumik world taste you're gonna love. So, Came the Mirror and Other Tales, available right now for you to get via the link in the description. If you want to support not just us, but one of the mangaka who made our videos, especially this one, Ranma and Inuyasha, possible, consider picking up a copy of Came the Mirror and Other Tales for yourself. I'd also like to take the time to thank Viz for reaching out to us and giving us the opportunity to do this. Very cool. We aren't the biggest anime channel, not even close, but the fact that they knew about us, liked what we did, and were willing to take this chance on us shows that not only do they understand and respect what we do, but they also understand and respect you guys. They are aware of the kind of audience that we have, and they know that you guys know that we wouldn't steer you in the wrong direction. So thank you, Viz. We really appreciate your trust and support. The link for Came the Mirror and Other Tales in the description. Now let's get back to it. Hey, still here. So obviously this video is going to be a little bit different from things that we've done in the past. Mostly, you're going to be looking at this a lot. The reason for that is because with this manga and the restrictions around the way that we're able to cover it, we're not going to be able to use a lot of digital images for you guys. So I have obviously the physical copy, so we're going to be using this as much as possible. But, you know, this isn't an anime and we can't use a ton of the manga, so hopefully you like this. I dressed up nice for you. Let's continue. So first of all, I don't want to ruin any of the plot of these short stories, so I'm not going to. And they're all really good, so I don't want to say that I specifically have a favorite, but with Cat, definitely stuck with me, as well as Lovely Flower and Revenge Doll. And I mean, that's half of them, so that's saying a lot. But the one that I really wanted to focus on specifically for this day is My Sweet Sunday. And this is the final story in the book, and it's a really interesting crossover between Takahashi and Mitsuru Adachi, who I honestly, I mean, it's gonna sound really dumb, but I hadn't heard of him before this book. So first up, My Sweet Sunday is kind of an autobiographical crossover manga, which is really interesting about how Rumiko Takahashi and Mitsuru Adachi grew up and then met, specifically through manga and working on Shonen Sunday. This story was cool because it filled two purposes. Obviously it was entertaining, but it also showed me a little bit of background story of Takahashi-san, which it's hard to get with mangaka. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the other thing that it did, like I said, was introduce me to Mitsuru Adachi, which is somebody who, again, I hadn't heard of and woefully had not read. Now, what's interesting is the cover panel for this manga has a splash page of a ton of characters, which you can see here, and hopefully the other camera view will give you a better look. But this one image right here caught my eye. I don't know what it was about the character design, but something about it just, I instantly fell in love and I needed to know what it was about. So I ended up picking up Adachi's work Cross Game and power binging it in 2 nights. It's like 175 chapters. Like this was not a short read by any chance. I also did this while we were producing our last video, so I was pretty busy during the production of Macross. But that manga, and obviously Adachi-san, was so good we are already working on a video for it. So I definitely recommend that you read Cross Game. Do not look at the wiki for it because it will spoil you immediately. So just don't look at the wiki. Hopefully you can trust me that I'm not going to lead you wrong and you check that out because that's definitely worth it. So after you read this, check out Cross Game. Also, you're gonna have to read it before the video comes out because there's no way to talk about the manga without spoiling some of it. So anyway, My Sweet Sunday is completely like anything else in the book. It's all or mostly non-fiction if you discount the jokes, but it really gives you an insight into Takahashi-san and how she evolved from a fan to the manga mogul that we know today. And obviously a lot of that is due to passion and love for manga. Now, Takahashi-san has always been interested in manga ever since she learned how to read, but before that, she really loved movies. And I think what we can glean from that is Rumiko Takahashi loves stories. It doesn't really matter what way they're coming out. If it's a good story, you know she's gonna like it. I think that works with what she does, especially if you look back at her older stuff like Urusei Yatsura or Ranma Half, where a lot of it is so very episodic. She's writing these one-off stories, or sometimes, you know, it's like a 3 or 4 chapter story using characters that she really enjoys writing with. And then of course you have her bigger works like Inuyasha and Mao, which have this ongoing bigger story arc within a very interesting environment. I think she likes that too. So I mean, if you line up everything she's done over the years, like there are so many stories within the larger narratives that she's writing. She's probably single-handedly written in the tens of thousands of stories. But I can also relate to that. I mean, we came from a gaming background, but it was always the characters and the stories within those games that drove us to make the content that we did. And now we're doing the same exact thing with manga, anime, and of course, the creators of the series. And I myself am a lover of stories. I started personally, obviously, with books and movies, but well before I got into manga, I was way into American comic books as well, specifically the X-Men. But Takahashi did end up falling in love with drawing because her father, who was a doctor, was also a pretty skilled artist. And he would draw pictures of her, and if you know anything about kids, when you focus something on them, they love that. So in turn, seeing what her father could do, Takahashi would then draw the scenes for movies that inspired her the most, or at least stuck with her, if you know what I mean. There's a great panel on page 177 that shows her as a very young girl drawing on the wall. It's like, again, it's just prime Rumiko Takahashi jokes. So now you fast forward to reading age, and all of a sudden Rumiko Takahashi has picked up Garo. Now, I don't know if you've seen Garo before. I'd actually never heard of it until one of our patrons introduced it to me, but it's pretty intense and awesome and definitely gruesome, but it's definitely not something you would expect a young kid to be reading, and especially not a young girl in 60s, 70s Japan. Again, more on that later, but did you ever watch or read something that you weren't supposed to when you were a kid? For me, it was things like South Park, Beavis and Butthead. Like, as a young teenager, I was really restricted on what I could not watch. So anytime I could sneak an episode of something naughty like Ren and Stimpy in, of course, that's exactly what I did. And it was always good and left me wanting more. And it was this kind of typical young boy anti-authoritarian crap that led me to my love of anime as well, specifically because of Yu Yu Hakusho, which was on late at night, and movies like Ninja Scroll, which were obviously rated TVMA or rated R or whatever, that my neighbors had laying around that we would watch when everybody else was asleep. For Takahashi-san, it was the same idea with Garo here, I would imagine. It was like she was reading something so forbidden, she just naturally got hooked on it. And while not all of her manga are particularly violent or gruesome, I mean, she is, again, probably best known for a romantic comedy, but when you look at things like Inuyasha and Mao, there is quite a lot of like gruesome violence that goes on in these things. I mean, you know, you got people like getting ripped in half, all sorts of stuff. I mean, she does kind of go into like the demon, you know, it's demons that are getting hurt, but I mean, it's pretty gnarly. But between an early development for love of drawing and her love of stories, it's not exactly surprising that Rumiko Takahashi would want to do something that related to manga. But interestingly, the more that you read about her life, the more you kind of understand that her success goes a lot deeper than a couple of early and lucky childhood coincidences. As she got older, she surrounded herself with other people who enjoyed the same things that she did, namely manga, being in manga clubs, and even set herself the goal to get published before she exited high school. Now, if you ever go diving into mangaka, that's something that actually kind of happens quite a lot, but the manga that Takahashi sent out didn't make an impression at all, and she did not get published in high school. In fact, she told herself she was totally going to give up and quit. She decided she was going to get a real job, like a writer or an illustrator, because those aren't competitive. Anyway, like a lot of people in Japan, Takahashi-san ended up moving to Tokyo to go to college, and she once again made friends with people who really enjoyed manga. And of course, once again, there was a club for people who liked manga, because Japan is just better than America in a lot of ways, but also not. So anyway, during the second year of college, her school offered a course which was called the Study of Sequential Art, which is basically a fancy use of trick wording to get parents to pay for, you know, their kids to learn how to make manga professionally. Rumiko had to beg her parents for the money to attend, and I mean, she basically told them that if she wasn't good at it, she would give up manga entirely for the rest of her life, which if she was trying to keep the whole manga thing on the DL, I think she screwed that up right there. Then again, her dad is a doctor and is probably smart enough to figure out what that class was about. Of course, maybe I'm giving too much credit to doctors. I don't know. Regardless, she did well enough to get a job as an intern or a special trainee, in parentheses, unpaid. Following that, she was asked to be an assistant for Kazuo Umes, a mangaka well known for his horror manga. Granted, that only lasted 3 days, but it was special on-the-job training, you know what I mean? She got to work on real manga. And of course, it was her third year in college when she began work on Urusei Yatsura, which is arguably the true start of her long and fabulous career. Takahashi-san, a woman after my own heart, of course, had trouble meeting deadlines. So the series was sporadically released, but she was also sharing a tiny 150 square foot apartment in which she lived and slept in the closet. Now, I too had to live in a closet. In fact, I lived in 2 closets for like the first 3 years of my career here on YouTube. Sometimes you just gotta live in a closet if you wanna, if you wanna do something that you really care about. What can I say? But for Takahashi-san, you probably know the gist of the rest of the story by now. Urusei Yatsura was a major hit. And like, when I say major hit, I mean household name. Like Lum, the heroine from that story, is an actual household name in Japan. She is a mascot for a ton of things. I mean, I even have a figure of her right here. You can see it. But I think when you add context in from what else we know about Rumiko Takahashi and this new kind of insight into her early life, There's a lot to learn from her story. A lot of people out there are constantly trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and it's not something that you always figure out in high school. It's not something you always figure out in college. You don't just make a choice and then have your life set on a direct path. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people out there who do that, but it's just like, you know, I definitely have trouble relating to them. Anyway, when it comes to the game and the quandaries of life, Rumiko Takahashi was no different than the rest of us who aren't, you know, doing that cookie cutter American thing. Remember, she'd even decided to give up on her dream, and that was only after one rejection. You're gonna get rejected a lot, and not just in your career. I mean, people aren't gonna like you the way you want them to. I mean, you're not gonna be able to get a Big Mac sometimes when you want a Big Mac, though I think you can complain to McDonald's on Twitter and they'll probably send you a coupon for a free Big Mac. But the point is, I mean, even in the Big Mac example here, there are certain things that you are just tied to that you can't put down. Takahashi-san tried again. She surrounded herself with other people who loved the same things that she did. She attended class for it. She developed her skills. She grabbed opportunities to work in the field, even if they don't really sound that fun. But the point is that she gave herself every single opportunity to succeed. And I really think that that is something worth thinking about. Now, I obviously have been in this field for a long time. I know a lot of YouTubers who come from all different walks of life. And of course, there are people who have never worked a real job before and just made it on YouTube. They did the right thing at the right time and it worked out. But the vast majority of people that I know, it's not a luck story. And that's something that isn't just worth thinking about, but I think it's worth internalizing. Rarely does anything work out on the first try. And I think looking right in front of you right now is a good example. Me and Tyler. We both worked on Tree School at its height. That channel had 960,000 subscribers and we made a ton of mistakes.
You won't die, you won't die.
He's purple.
Before that, I had my own YouTube channel and I didn't know anything about how YouTube worked. And I got it up to a couple thousand subscribers, but man, I was just not getting the views. I was just not getting it where I wanted to go. And Tyler had seriously tried making YouTube channels at least twice before Tree School. Both of them obviously failed. And before all of this, I was in punk bands and I never even booked myself a show one time, not one single time. I had super bad social anxiety, so it was always other bandmates that were able to do that for me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wrote all the music, so, you know, I kind of made up for it, but still, the fact is that if I was on my own doing that kind of stuff, I would have failed. And I mean, technically I did fail because I'm not a touring musician right now, and part of that is probably because I didn't put myself out there in the way that I should have. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of failure, and it takes a lot of sacrifice to make something even as middling as we are right now, at least in the eyes of YouTube. We're doing very well on Patreon, so thank you guys. And I've lived that life where your entire day is about your job and where your parents and family think that what you're doing is crazy and it doesn't make any sense and they think you're making a mistake. You know, where you're being paid so little that you can barely survive, but you keep going because, you know, you believe in what you're doing and you really hope that one day it'll work. And don't get me wrong, like, it's not easy. Sometimes it's really stupid. Like, I still suffer physically and mentally from, you know, really neglecting myself during the early stages of my career. But learning about how Rumiko Takahashi became the manga powerhouse that she is really hit home because it kind of reminded me of, you know, the struggles that I went through. She wasn't a prodigy or a genius. She just had a dream and she did everything that she could to make it come true. I would say that 99% of artists always have an underdog story. Probably 95% of them start from nothing. And even the ones who are lucky and make it, about maybe 0.05% of them have any kind of consistency or staying power. You know what I mean? Like, you always get your one-hit wonders, but so many of them drop off into nothingness. Even if somebody was lucky, it still takes a lot of dedication to work to maintain something that was generated through luck because you didn't even learn the skills that you needed to get to where you were in the first place. And I think that Takahashi-san's story really kind of reveals that it's not so much about getting lucky or just really loving something. It's about how you go about using that passion and how you go about revolving your life around what it is that you love. You have to meet like-minded people. You have to get experience within the space. And if you do get lucky and you get a big break, it's not because you were in the right place at the right time. It's because you were in the right place all the time because you always were working to put yourself there. So Takahashi-san's style has become instantly recognizable over time, creating a feeling of what's come to be known as the Rumik world, which is also another series of short stories written by Rumiko Takahashi. However, the point is when you're reading a work from Takahashi-san, you just kind of know it. From the art to the theming, there is something about her style that is just instantly recognizable and always enjoyable. And personally, I think that's kind of awesome in a medium where it's honestly difficult to tell things apart, at least in the way where you're like, oh, this is definitely done by this artist. Being instantly recognizable is a major achievement. And of course, this tradition would be carried on by artists like Kyu Hayashida and Tite Kubo. However, the only other person that I can think of that is so obviously themselves in the same kind of way that Rumiko Takahashi is Akira Toriyama. And honestly, being compared to Akira Toriyama in any way is a major accomplishment. But personally, what I love about Takahashi-san's work myself is its simplicity. And there is nothing wrong with simplicity. In fact, I think that it's a lot harder to make something simple but enjoyable and engaging and making you want to come back for more. I mean, I read 38 volumes of Ranma for our Ranma video, and I would say 95% of those chapters don't have anything to do with one another. I mean, every once in a while there's a character added in, but there was something that was just simple and enjoyable about watching the characters that she created interact in these short stories that were funny and kind of evocative. And again, there's an elegance to that simplicity that leads to that comfortable, kind of nostalgic feeling about her work. And it's why it's so easy to come back to them over and over again. I cannot tell you how many times I've rewatched Inuyasha. And one of the things that I love the most is that it's obvious that she's not really trying to compete with anyone. Takahashi-san is making what she wants to see be made, and nobody's going to do it for her. And that is what I strive to do with any kind of project that I'm working on. The only reason that I make things is because I'm making something that I want to see, and nobody's going to do it for me. And while all of this explains her backstory, I think it's important to delve into Takahashi's impact on manga as a whole. Let me tell you, it's not exactly the easiest thing to research in the world. First off, there's very little in terms of interviews with Takahashi-san. She's not one for fame or glamour, and that's kind of pretty common with mangaka. One of the few interviews that I did find asked why she got a goofy perm, and it was because she didn't want to be recognized while she was out and about. Since there's so little to actually go off of in her own exact recorded words, we do kind of have to speculate and infer from things more than you would normally have to. But I think it's completely fair to say that Takahashi-san is easily one of the first in the second generation of mangaka to really be recognized internationally, and of course to specifically impact the Western world. I don't have a lot of data on international releases of Urusei Yatsura and Maison Ikkoku, but when it came to Ranma in the late 80s, I mean, Brazil was all about it. They're still all about it. Brazil loved me some Ranma. And of course, much later, Inuyasha was, that was an anime converter for the hundreds of thousands of people. Like, you know, if as long as they're not embarrassed to admit it, like, Inuyasha is out here. But one of the neatest things about her work is that it's not just for boys or just for girls in that kind of way. You know what I'm talking about. Like, back in the day, Sailor Moon was always billed as a show for girls. Dragon Ball Z was always billed as a show for boys in the very, gender separated 90s. But what about Ranma Half? What about Urusei Yatsura? Like, how do you build that, you know? I think Inuyasha is like, it's very difficult to kind of give that to one audience or another, right? Because on one hand, it's a love story. On the other hand, it's kind of a shonen battle manga. And it's, it's got some gruesomeness, but then it's got some cutiness. There's like a love triangle going on, sometimes like a quadrangle. How do you make the merchandise for that? But still, it was extremely successful. And I think part of the success of this is because Takahashi knows how to work with characters and emotion. A lot of them are written to kind of mess with gender norms, but honestly, there are inherent emotions that men, women, and everything in between feel that are just universal. Boys and girls watching Inuyasha were waiting for them to make out. I mean, I'm just saying, it's just everybody's waiting for it. But it's not just love and anger and stuff like that. I mean, we're talking about embarrassment, pride, failure. There's so many emotional themes in her work that really do hit home regardless of who you are. And for more on that specifically, I definitely recommend checking out our Ranma video. We go very heavily into that. But I mean, just dealing with some of the themes in Ranma, and themes that she deals with in a lot of her early works, like, you know, this gender bending kind of stuff, and this odd, you know, what we would call now toxic masculinity that is rife throughout Urusei Yatsura and Ranma in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, in a very obvious, like, she's poking fun at it. She's still able to create an emotional through line to her audience, regardless of whether they're boys or girls. And I think, to me, that's the single main reason that her works are so successful, because she can point things out like that in a way that everybody can understand, because in a way everybody's kind of dealt with that. I mean, whether you want to call it toxic masculinity or not, I guarantee you, if you are a boy and you are listening to this video, somebody at some time has told you not to cry. Somebody at some time has told you not to be a sissy. So not only is she able to craft these kind of stories, but she's able to do it as a woman, and not only a woman, but a woman in Japan, which at the time was something completely unheard of. So not only was she creating works that had a very large opportunity to connect with people of many different backgrounds, but she was also paving a path for more women mangaka in the space. Recently, there's been this whole controversy of like, oh, 77% of manga are written by women. Now, I don't know necessarily where that statistic is coming from, but I mean, that wouldn't have been possible without Rumiko Takahashi paving the way. Now, don't get me wrong, if you've seen Ranma half, you know Rumiko Takahashi loves a titty just as much as any other 14-year-old boy, which I'm sure helped in the beginning. But it's important to recognize the significance of her achievements within the confines of Japanese society. The country is still working on, let's say, toning down the misogyny, but Japan, and specifically the professional world in Japan, doesn't really take women very seriously. And that's to say the least. To say the most, you could say they treat women like shit. So not only has Takahashi-san had unparalleled success as a mangaka, but she's out here representing the ovarian persuasion in a tier completely of her own. She's one of the reasons that we have amazing stories like Kyu Hayashida's Dorohedoro, or you know, her recent work, Die Dark, and of course anything that Clamp has ever made. And just to put this into perspective, Dorohedoro is a pretty old manga. It started back in 2000. Kyu Hayashida was born in 1977, and Urusei Yatsura began publication in 1978. Clamp started creating manga in 1987. So the women in the manga space that we look up to grew up with their formative years being filled with Takahashi-san's work. And for a long time, women were kind of just expected to create shoujo, and that's it. But once again, Takahashi broke that mold and paved the way forward. I don't think it's a coincidence that in 2022, we are seeing that 77% of manga are being written by women. And obviously that number has reached that peak since Takahashi began publishing. I also don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing these women create things like Dorohedoro or X, which are about as far from shoujo as you could possibly get. Obviously, these are only two examples of a person and a group of people who were influenced by Rumiko Takahashi's works, but women are now all over the place in the manga scene, creating awesome works that are innovating and interesting, and pushing the medium as a whole in their respective genres forward. And if you need another example to kind of, you know, get you to understand what I'm talking about, Hiromu Arakawa created Full Metal Alchemist. I mean, that is one of the prime works in the past 20 years. It's also a shonen manga about boys and brotherhood, and as we all know, it hits those veins with pinpoint precision. So for all the anime and manga that we've covered on this channel, this is the first time we've ever specifically focused on one of their creators, and it's something that I would like to do more often. Obviously not necessarily with all this face cam, but I do just want to let you know that in general, mangaka are kind of weirdos. Not that YouTubers aren't weirdos, but like mangaka are definitely kind of weirdos. They live a different lifestyle and are often shut-ins and hide away from the fame that their work brings. Now, I don't know if that's a Japanese kind of humility thing, but if you look around, I mean, people like Gege Akutami, I mean, they don't even show their face at all. For the most part, mangaka seem to just kind of want to be left alone. But in one of the interviews that Rumiko Takahashi did for the Rumik World, she was asked what she would come back as if reincarnation existed, and she said a manga artist. She said, "We never changed, so I think it would be impossible to want to be anything else." And I think that speaks volumes to her dedication, and more importantly than that, her enjoyment of what she does. Doing something for 50 years, like if you don't get tired of it, that's really impressive. That is le passion. Remember, this is a woman that at 63, having already made her mark on the world, having inspired and entertained millions, still sits down every week and makes a chapter of manga. Spends multiple all-nighters, which like at her age, that's crazy. I mean, honestly, take it from her own words. It's what she said. Honestly, don't even know if I have the capability to love my work that much. Then again, we don't know what, YouTube content or internet content is going to look like in 40 years. But I do think looking for those feelings in what you do is incredibly important in being happy with your life. Takahashi-san is somebody whose work and creativity is something I admire incredibly, but her work ethic is also something that like cannot be understated. And because of it, she was able to touch and inspire millions and millions of people all across the world. I'm glad that I was able to cover her first, specifically because of how much of an impact she's had on my life, but also because she's a role model for people who aspire to create. So hopefully this will help inspire you too. So whether you love Rumiko Takahashi or if you've never heard of her before, I definitely hope that you check out the link in our description and check out Came the Mirror and Other Tales. Obviously, it's filled with her lesser known works, which was on purpose, but it has all the same flavor and taste that you're going to get from everything else she's done in her giant works, which I also hope that you will go out and read as well. And that's about it for me. I'm going through some stuff right now. If you're into the Bonsai Pop lore, you know what's up. But getting this video out this week was definitely a bit of a struggle. So thank you for being patient with me, and thank you to all our patrons and everybody who's been patient with me. I appreciate it very much. It's time for Patreon shoutouts, so I'd like to thank our lucky patron of the week, Doobie, and our high tier patron of the week, Big Filet. I'm thinking the next video that we're going to be doing is on cross games, so I'm excited about that. Definitely, I would say at least read the first 10 chapters before coming to the video. And the reason I'm saying to read, not watch, is because the anime stuffs the first like 7 to 10 chapters into the first episode, and it's kind of too quick. It doesn't really get you the way that the beginning of the manga does. But yeah, I'm really excited about that. Looks like we're gonna have Axel back to help with editing on that one, so it's gonna be a lot of fun. We also have a bunch of other stuff that's already in works. We got Night on the Galactic Railroad. We have some Steins Gate that's coming down the line. It's gonna be a good year, guys. We got a lot going on. The Patreon support has been awesome. It's allowed us to hire editors. So yeah, that's it. Please check out the link in the description for Came to Mirror and Other Tales, and show Viz that they can come to us again if they would so choose. And with that, I'm Mike. This is Bonsai Pop. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.